So semi-tractor trailer trucks with trailers and certain other trucks that would have incurred additional costs from vehicle operating costs and increased travel times associated with detours or postings. This is kind of meant to reflect the savings these tractor trailers would get from avoiding detours and weight limit postings. So the Office of Revenue and Revenue Analysis and Office of Management and Budget provided these cost saving estimates to REMI. And from the years of 2018 to 2025, the cost savings amounted to just under $10 million over the 8-year period. And those cost savings were predicted to continue through the year of 2032, but for the scope of the analysis, REMI only modeled them for the analysis period. And then these cost savings are only for vehicle operating costs. Again, this did not include any network benefits that were created from any infrastructure improvements or construction. So the in-state funding liability, this is just the cost that will be paid by businesses, state and local government, and Rhode Island consumers as a result of the different financing mechanisms. So scenario 1 and scenario 2, the $160 million that you see are the in-state cost of the 100% tolling financing regime. And then scenarios 3 through 8, a portion of the tolling finance is shifted to some combination of a gas and or diesel tax increase. So the $194 million that you see, that's an extra $34 million. That's because of the gas and or diesel tax, which become burdens primarily on Rhode Island's consumers and businesses. And again, the capital spending is determined by whether the scenario counted for the $400 million in federal funding for that 610 transit development. So scenarios 1, which again is a full RhodeWorks proposal, and then also scenarios 3, 5, and 7, the $896 million seen reflects that $400 million in federal funding for the transit development, and then vice versa for scenarios 2, 4, 6, and 8. So here is a summary of the economic and demographic results for each scenario. All of these scenarios illustrate positive economic and demographic results relative to the constrained resources plan. Again, that's kind of the baseline that would be implemented in the absence of RhodeWorks. The main factor behind this is that RhodeWorks generates most of its funding from the federal government and non-Rhode Island actors, which would be semi-tractor trailer trucks that pass through the state without stopping. It's kind of like the pass-through that we talked about earlier, with their trips originating at an out-of-state starting point and then ending at an out-of-state starting point. So kind of just using Rhode Island's roads as a pass-through to make their trip, but still paying the tolls. So in scenario 1, the full RhodeWorks proposal, there's 6,487 new jobs. There's an increase in $538 million in gross state product, $520 million in nominal personal income, and $344 million in real disposable income. So, at a quick glance, you'll see that scenarios 2, 4, 6, and 8 all have less significant positive economic impacts than scenarios 3, 5, and 7. When thinking about why, for all of these scenarios 2, 4, 6, and 8, there is no $400 million in federal funding for the transit project. However, beyond just that, it is also because of the financing regimes, and this is why it's critical to look at the financing of transportation projects and accounting for all those other economic actors. And it's also, another reminder to make sure we look at real disposable personal income, which measures, the consumer's purchasing power by accounting for the impact of increased prices that then result from the higher transportation costs from these different scenarios. So in all 8 scenarios, real disposable personal income demonstrates a positive effect, albeit at a significantly lower level than nominal personal income. So thus, even after accounting for the increased costs imposed on the Rhode Island economy from the RhodeWorks proposal, in the aggregate, Rhode Island consumers are better off than they would be under the constrained resources plan than as they are now with under some type of variation of any RhodeWorks proposal. So there are somewhat similar stories in personal incomes for scenarios 2, 4, 6, and 8. And then, again, all of those do not account for the $400 million in federal funding. However, the financing regimes in scenarios 4 and 6 and 8 also include some variation of a gas or diesel tax, which is then passed on to Rhode Islanders. This is why for scenarios 4, 6, and 8, there are smaller gains, actually the smallest gains of all scenarios in real disposable income compared to scenario 2. And the other scenarios, which are financed solely by tolling from non-Rhode Island actors, have a bit more impact in terms of real disposable income. And again, reiterate, compared to the baseline, all these scenarios for all forms of financing, whether they include the federal funding for the transit project or not, do have positive economic impacts. However, as I previously stated, the scenarios that include the federal funding for that transit project all provide greater economic returns when compared to the scenarios that do not. So the tables below illustrate the differences between the economic returns for the full RhodeWorks proposal, again, scenario 1, and then the other scenarios 3, 5, and 7 that also include the federal funding for the 610 transit project. In scenario 5, when compared to scenario 1, where there's an annual $12.5 million diesel tax increase imposed, in terms of the measures of economic returns. Excuse me, I'm meant to be speaking about scenario 3. So in scenario 3, the gasoline tax, where there's only a gasoline tax, one does see increases in employment, gross state product, and output when compared to scenario 1. However, when you're looking at residents adjusted employment, it actually shows a loss of in-state employment. So further, there's also labor force decreases and population decreases, which might be suggesting that people will be leaving the state and moving to just the surrounding areas that might have become relatively more cost competitive. And then also you'll see a result in a decrease of real disposable income. So the full RhodeWorks proposal in scenario 1 represents more positive economic impacts than scenario 5, which is only a diesel tax increase, and then scenario 7 as well, which is a gas and diesel tax increase. So in conclusion, all of these different scenarios and variations when compared to the baseline of the Constrained Resources Plan all have a positive impact on the Rhode Island economy. The full RhodeWorks proposal, which includes the $400 million in federal funding for the transit project and the funding mechanism of a 100% tolling regime without any increases in a gas or diesel tax, kind of resulted in 6,487 new jobs, $538 million in gross state product, $520 million in nominal personal income, and then $344 million in real disposable income. The alternative scenarios, which again differed from RhodeWorks, depending on whether they included the federal funding for the transit development and some type of combination of a gas or diesel tax. Some of these had greater employment impacts than the full RhodeWorks proposal, but had lower gains in real disposable income and decreases in population that reflected some residents maybe moving to nearby areas that have become more cost competitive. So that was a summary of the economic and demographic impacts from the RhodeWorks proposal REMI conducted. Again, I just want to reiterate that was only analyzing construction financing impacts. It did not touch on any transportation network improvements, as that was not in the scope of the analysis. So that's what I want to illustrate in the TranSight model. If we were to look at a project similar to RhodeWorks and include the additional analysis of looking at network improvements. So I'm going to use some of the same variables REMI used in the RhodeWorks analysis. So I'll be looking at simulating some type of highway and bridge construction, a gas tax, an increase in production costs for the trucking industry, vehicle operating cost savings, and then I'll be layering that on top of a reduction in transportation accessibility costs for the region that would reflect some type of improvement in the transportation network. And then again, what the model I'll be opening up is it's a demo model. It's not reflecting any real real project data. It's simply meant for a demonstration, so do take it with a grain of salt. And then one last quick reminder before I jump into the demo. If you have any questions about the RhodeWorks proposal or any come up during the demo or afterwards, feel free to just put them in the chat box below, and we'll get to those after the demo. So now just bear with me as I get the model up. Okay. Again, this is the home screen for the REMI TranSight model. Every REMI model starts with a national baseline forecast, which comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Census Bureau, and other national macroeconomic data sources. See here. And the same goes for a regional baseline. And then we've been working with University of Michigan's Center Research Seminar on Quantitative Economics to develop, more updated economic forecasts to reflect the quickly changing economic conditions because of COVID-19. The most recent one we have out is November, December. This is a demo model, so it just has August, but it's as easy as coming in here and integrating that updated forecast into the model, and we're also able to do it with other national macroeconomic forecasts such as IHS, Moody's, or whatever a user may prefer. And I already have this scenario I just outlined run through just to save some time. So to simulate some type of highway and bridge construction, I used the same policy variable that was used in the RhodeWorks analysis, detailed industry sales for transportation structures, highways, and streets. And I kind of assumed this would be a $400 million spending spread out over 4 years. Again, these are just ballpark numbers that I use for the purposes of this demo, so do take them with a grain of salt. To simulate some type of vehicle operating cost savings, we thought of this as kind of a decrease in about 1% for some type of consumer spending on other motor vehicle services. If we were to think about something like a gas tax, again, and for RhodeWorks, REMI, the way the REMI modeled this was with the policy rail of consumer price on motor vehicles, fuels, lubricants, and fluids. So we assumed about a 2% increase on motor vehicle fuels, lubricants, and fluids here to kind of simulate something like that. And then to think about maybe the additional production costs incurred on the trucking industry, as REMI did in the RhodeWorks proposal. We bumped production costs for the trucking industry, for $50 million, out to 2016. And then again, the RhodeWorks proposal didn't touch on any network improvements. And as I mentioned before, even before getting the RhodeWorks proposal, REMI can look at network improvements even without integrating a travel demand model. The way we do that is the transportation cost matrices, which you can either touch on accessibility costs, which I did here. So we're assuming about a 1% decrease in accessibility costs because of this investment into improving the infrastructure in the Chicago region out to the year 2060. You can do it with commuting costs, which I didn't use here, but also the reduction in transportation costs. And again, we assumed about a 1% decrease in transportation costs out to 2060. I'm going to save some time. We'd normally come here and run it, but I already ran it ahead of time. And now we can take a look at results. And again, just take these results with a grain of salt. It's not any specific project data. It's just meant for the purposes of the demo. So you see here for the Chicago region, let's get into percent change. You see positive effects on unemployment going out. There's positive impacts on population, GDP. There's positive impacts. Personal income you do see going up. Real disposable personal income also increases. Relative delivered price. Initially it's positive. It's not necessarily a good thing, but over time, as the project benefits go, you do see a reduction in relative delivered price. And it's a similar story for relative cost of production. Commodity access, there's positive improvements as well. We can take a look at these in the economic summary. This is, I looked at this all in the general Chicago metro area. You see the big initial spike in employment and population, and then the kind of more gradual increase over time. Similar story for GDP and output, as well as personal income and disposable income. We want to come in here and get a little bit more into the weeds and detailed looks at employment. We can maybe think about employment by industry. So here are some of the industries that are most impacted. You see let's go into percent change. You see a pretty significant jump for the years of the construction in the project, which eventually, this is for the construction industry, which eventually, it doesn't maintain that same level. Positive effects in manufacturing and mining and other associated industries. Think about ways that GDP might be changing. Look at different trade impacts. Think about the ways that population might be changing over time. So the start of the project and out to the whole project's life, and effects out to 2060, how the population of the region might be changing. So this is kind of looking at economic migrants. So REMI has an equation in its model that accounts for people that might be moving to a region because of an increase in opportunity, or might be even leaving region because they're of a lack of economic opportunity. But you do see positives here for the Chicago region. But let's see if that's different for. So the rest of the Midwest, it's a bit more negative, which might reflect the comparative advantage that the Chicago metro area now has. So there's a lot of really detailed economic and demographic results that we can get into. But I think that's a general idea of, thinking about kind of the initial construction and financing impacts that are, again, critical to look at in a transportation project. Also thinking about how network improvements will have effects on the economy. And when you can look at them holistically, as demonstrated here in the REMI model, you can get very critical economic and demographic results that are going to be important for illustrating the benefits of a project, and also just evaluating the economic merit to make sure it's something that will be beneficial for the economy of a region in the long run.